up one morning thinking it's just another day, and then your world gets flipped upside down before you've even had your coffee? Well, strap in, Reddit, because that's how this mess kicked off. I'm Brandon. No, not the happily married Brandon with the white picket fence and the wife who adores him. That guy got tossed out the window the second I overheard Helen, my wife of 8 years, giggling on the phone with her friend Angela. Now, Angela's this high-powered marketing exec, always dressed to kill, and with a laugh that could curdle milk. She's the type that considers marriage a game and fidelity a suggestion. I never liked her, but Helen? She practically worshipped the ground Angela strutted on. So, there I was, passing by Helen's home office door on my way to the kitchen, and I catch this snippet of their conversation. Brandon doesn't have to know, it's just a bit of fun. You deserve more than his tired, old-fashioned view of marriage. It hit me like a punch to the gut. My Helen, the one who'd stand by me through thick and thin, getting an earful of this garbagey and agreeing with it. I knew I should have given Helen the choice, Angela or me, earlier, but I messed up and here I am now. I felt this cold rage settle in as I stood there, my hand clenched around the doorknob. This wasn't just a casual chat, this was my wife, being egged on by her so-called friend to cheat. To toss everything we had built together in the trash. And the worst part? She was laughing. That sound, it was like she'd completely forgotten who she was. Or maybe I never knew her at all. That's the raw, unfiltered start of my story, folks. No sweet walks down memory lane here. Just the bitter truth of a man who got a wake-up call he never asked for. I scoured through our bank statements, credit cards, phone bills, you name it. I was looking for anything, a clue that Helen was taking these suggestions from Angela to heart. But here's the kicker, folks. There was nothing. Nada. Zilch. Our bank statements were as mundane as they come. Groceries, a charge for a new blender because I broke ours trying to make margaritas, the usual. Phone bills? The most scandalous thing was the overage charge from Helen's mom calling to talk her ear off. I even started checking the mileage on her car. Yeah, I got that desperate. But every time it added up perfectly to her work and back, maybe a little detour to the grocery store or the gym. It was infuriating. It was like I was trying to catch smoke with my bare hands. Hey everyone. Unfortunately, basically everyone who is watching these videos isn't subscribed. It would mean the world to me to quickly get out of the full screen video for 3 seconds and press that subscribe button. It's free, and you can unsubscribe anytime. Sorry for bothering, and thank you so much if you subscribed. Then there was Angela, who was as slippery as an eel. I dropped by Helen's boutique unannounced, hoping to catch them in some illicit planning session, but it was always business as usual. Smiles, chatter about sales targets, and not even a hint of the deception I'd overheard. It made me doubt my own ears. Had I really heard what I thought I did? I felt like I was living in some parallel universe where everything looked exactly the same but was completely different. Here I was, a man who could turn a piece of wood into art, feeling completely powerless against the intangible. Helen was the perfect wife by all accounts, and Angela, the master manipulator, seemed like the supportive best friend. But you know that feeling in your gut? That gnawing, twisting certainty that something's off? It wouldn't let up. It kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling while Helen slept peacefully beside me. I'd lay there, listening to the rhythm of her breath, wondering if she was dreaming of a life without me. A life Angela had convinced her she deserved. I couldn't shake it. So I kept watching, waiting, because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You hope you're wrong about them even when everything inside of you is screaming that you're not. Hey Reddit, it's Brandon again. When I last left off, I was hanging by a thread, remember? Well, that thread's been fraying like crazy. Every day, the same routine. Wake up, watch Helen for any signs, any slip-up, any hint that could prove she wasn't the woman I thought she was. It was eating me alive. I started to lose it, honestly. My workshop, which used to be my sanctuary, started to feel like a prison. I'd stare at a block of wood for hours, chisel in hand, and the patterns I'd usually coax out of the grain just wouldn't come. My clients started asking questions. Is everything all right, Brandon? They'd say. This doesn't look like your best work. And they were right. It wasn't. My buddies would call, ready for a round of beers and some pool. and I'd just ignore the calls. I couldn't face them, couldn't pretend everything was fine while my marriage was dangling over the edge of a cliff. I was the guy who had it all together, but now? I was the guy spying on his wife, doubting her every move, and losing sleep over a conversation that might have meant nothing, or everything. I remember one night, I got up while Helen was still sleeping. I just sat there in the dark, watching the rise and fall of her chest, listening to her breathing. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. I wanted to wake her up, to demand the truth, to end this torment. But I couldn't. I didn't have proof, just this gnawing suspicion that kept whispering in my ear, "She's lying to you." My world narrowed down to this singular focus: find the truth. It wasn't just about whether she was cheating anymore. It was about whether I could trust my own judgment. If I was wrong about her, what else was I wrong about? Myself, my friends, my whole damn life? The isolation was the worst part. It's like I built this wall around myself, brick by brick, with every doubt and every unanswered question. I stopped going to family barbecues, dodged my mom's Sunday dinners, and became a ghost to my own siblings. I was so deep in my own head, I couldn't find the way out. All right, Reddit, it's Brandon again. My story hit a really tough spot. I decided it was time to ask Helen what was going on. I couldn't keep wondering and feeling bad all the time. I came in from working on some furniture in the garage, and there was Helen sitting on the sofa with her phone. I took a deep breath and told her we needed to talk. I was really calm, even though inside I felt like a storm was raging. We sat down and I told her straight up about the phone call I overheard with Angela, about how I couldn't sleep, and about all the times I tried to find out if she was seeing someone else behind my back. I asked her, "Is there someone else, Helen?" She said no, she wasn't seeing anyone else. She cried and said that Angela was just making a bad joke and that I got it all wrong. She wanted me to believe her, she reached out to me, but I just couldn't. I couldn't hold her hand or make her feel better. I really wanted to believe her, guys. She's my wife, Helen, who I've loved for so long. But I just couldn't get Angela's words out of my head. We went to bed that night but didn't talk. We didn't kiss goodnight or say "I love you" like we usually do. She was crying quietly, and I just lay there, looking up at the ceiling, wondering if I even wanted to know the truth, or if it was better not to know. Out of the blue, I got help from someone I never expected to get involved. I was in my shop, focusing on a piece of wood that was supposed to become someone's rocking chair, trying to find some peace in the familiar shavings and sawdust. That's when Jeff walked in. Now, Jeff is someone I'd call an acquaintance, good for small talk, knows a lot about a lot, and always has a way of popping in when you least expect it. He had this serious look on his face, which wasn't like him at all. He asked if we could step into the back room for a chat, away from the prying eyes of the storefront. So there we were, surrounded by the skeletons of half-finished furniture, and he starts telling me this story. Turns out, Jeff's sister works at the hotel where Angela and Helen have been holding these so-called business meetings. And she's seen Helen there too, but she was never alone. Always with this one guy, always cozy, like they were more than just friends. Jeff said his sister kept it to herself because she didn't want to cause any trouble without being sure of what was happening. I felt like I was in a bad dream. All this time I had this feeling, but no proof. And here was Jeff, handing me the last piece I needed. My head was spinning, but there was also this sense of relief. Finally, I had something solid. Jeff must have seen the emotions on my face because he put a hand on my shoulder and said he was sorry to be the bearer of bad news but thought I had the right to know. He said he'd be there if I needed anything, which was the last thing I expected to hear from him. So, there I was with this information that felt like a heavy brick in my hands. It was the key to everything that had been hidden from me, and now I had a decision to make about what to do next. Okay, Reddit, it's Brandon. After finding out the truth, I had to decide what to do. I didn't want to just lash out, I wanted to be smart about it, to do something that really mattered. First things first, I got my evidence together and talked to a lawyer. I wanted to know where I stood legally. The lawyer said the evidence was good. If it came down to it, I could take Helen to court. But this wasn't just about legal stuff. I wanted Helen and Angela to understand the consequences of their actions. For Angela, I knew I had to be subtle. She worked at this fancy marketing firm, and they have a reputation to uphold. So, I sent a carefully worded letter to her boss, suggesting they look into Angela's behavior outside of work. I kept it anonymous and stuck to the facts. Next, I focused on Helen. I waited until she was out, then I took my most important things and left the house. I didn't make a scene. I just left and went to stay with my brother. I needed some space to clear my head. I turned off my phone and stayed off social media. I just needed a break from everything. Helen tried to reach out, of course. She called, she texted, but I wasn't ready to talk to her. Not after all this. That was how I handled it. Quietly, but in a way that let them both know I was serious. It's not over yet, though. There's still more to come in this whole mess. Stay with me. So, I laid out my cards, did what I had to do, and stepped back to watch the fallout. It's been a wild ride, and here's how it all went down after the dust started to settle. I heard through the grapevine what happened with Angela. That letter I sent, it did the trick. Her bosses took a closer look at her, and let's just say they didn't like what they saw. Last I heard, she was put on leave and had to scramble to keep her job. I guess her co-workers started seeing a different side of her, the one I'd been warning them about. Then there's Helen. After I left that evidence on the kitchen table and moved out, things for her got real. She came home to an empty house and a whole lot of truth staring back at her. She tried calling me, leaving voicemails, sending texts, apologies, excuses, promises to change. But I couldn't just forget everything and go back. Too much had happened. I needed time to think, to be away from all the drama. I found out that Helen's boutique started to suffer without her focus. She lost a couple of big clients, and without Angela to push her into the spotlight, things just weren't the same. It was tough on her, that much was clear, but it was the bed she made. Now, let's talk about me for a second. I did a lot of thinking, a lot of solo drives, a lot of staring at the ocean. I wondered if I went too far, if maybe I should have handled things differently. But then I remembered that feeling, that cold pit in my stomach when I first suspected something was wrong. And I knew I couldn't have just let it slide. I don't take joy in what happened to Angela or Helen. It's not about that. It's about actions and consequences. I had to face mine, and they had to face theirs. I just wish it hadn't come to all this. So, here I am, working in my shop again, finding peace in the grains of wood, in the smell of sawdust. I'm picking up the pieces, but it's a slow process. Every day's a little better, a little clearer. I'm starting to feel like myself again, but there's still a ways to go. That's the aftermath, Reddit. It's messy, it's sad, but it's real. This whole saga, it's taught me a lot about trust, about forgiveness, and about moving on. Thanks everyone for listening. It would mean the world to me if you would subscribe to the channel. Thanks and have a great rest of your day or night.
My wife began acting strange once we marked our 5-year anniversary, and I knew something was up. She began making shady movements and staying up late to text on the phone with her lights dimmed low. I know you all must be thinking there's nothing wrong with staying up a little late and texting on the phone. It might probably be the girls' group chat. Maybe they're planning a hangout or something. I thought that was maybe it. Lol. I thought there wasn't a lot to it. Label me stupid, right? Well, I've been called stupid in different ways when it comes to my wife. I relayed my worries to my friends, and they all thought I was being paranoid over a few nights of staying up late and receiving text messages. But after various nights of watching her while pretending to sleep, I knew it wasn't just my paranoia. At first, she tried to be discreet with it, of course, but I haven't been fooled ever since I left high school. She would sneak into the bathroom and stay there for hours and sneak back in as the day was about to break. My fellow Redditors, you all don't think that was my paranoia playing a role, right? Well, before you judge me, I decided to test if it was a fluke. I became extra nice. Attention to details and all the stuff ladies seem to love. It was all part of a scheme to know if I was imagining things. Far be it from me to ask her and have her lie to my face, so I planned a trip. It was our 5-year anniversary after all, and I'm sure you all will agree with me that this was the perfect way to watch her without raising suspicions. It was a weekend getaway, and we had to do everything together. So if she's acting up or strange, I would see it clearly, and I would know. As you have it, my friends on here, I took my wife on the weekend getaway, and my suspicions were confirmed. My wife was indeed hiding something with how strange she was acting. It began when we were shown into our luxurious hotel room in the Pacific Northwest, and she had dropped her phone to go freshen up. Can you imagine the way she had run to it at the sound of a text message notification? It was like she was trapped in the Sahara Desert and her phone was the only source of water. I kid you not. I watched her grab the phone and dash back into the bathroom, and I couldn't do anything but stare in disbelief. The next incident happened when we went out to grab the romantic candlelight dinner the hotel offered as part of the itinerary for our trip. All through the dinner, the text messages were frequent based on how late the dinner was. It was her usual texting time with whoever she was on the phone with. So I did the brave thing and asked what the messages were all about and got slapped in the face with a lie. I mean, did she actually expect to believe it was the girls' group chat that texted her constantly? And what happened to trying to find time for your husband during your anniversary getaway? I let that slide too because, as I said, I didn't want to raise suspicions, just gather enough evidence to know I wasn't paranoid. Throughout the weekend, my wife was glued to her phone like a magnet. Nothing could come between. At this point, she was rubbing it in my face that I was a fool, so I laid the last trap. I booked an all-night spa for her, the whole massages, oils, and whatnot. My plan, you may ask? Well, she couldn't be getting a body massage and texting. That's when I planned to strike. I had agreed with the masseuse, going so far as paying them a little tip for them to slip me my wife's phone when she came in for the massage. Color me shamed, but I was going mad with the act and I needed to know. If you all were in my shoes, I'm pretty sure you would have all resorted to measures way worse than this. I know you're wondering how I planned to unlock the phone once I got it, but if you know my wife as much as I do, she wasn't really the smartest one in the box. It was either going to be her birthday or something along the lines of an important event date. I waited just outside the door as her massage date began. True to their word, the masseuse brought out the phone and handed it to me a little later just as another text came in. Turns out I didn't need to unlock it. My fellow Redditors, I'm sure you already know who it was, but I wasn't prepared for what I saw on the pop-up screen. It was a text, of course. My wife and her lover were predictable maniacs, but the context of the text was what sent me reeling. It turned out I wasn't paranoid at all. My wife of 5 years was having an affair outside our marriage, and she and her lover were getting ready to serve me divorce papers from all indications of the message. What else could? I can't wait for you to leave him mean. 5 years went down the drain just like that. Although ours wasn't the best of marriages, I don't believe in love and all its excesses, but I tried. I did try to make it work, but it seems I was too weird that my wife didn't even have the audacity to look me in the face and tell me she's done. She had to sneak around with an unknown person through late-night texts. That was pathetic, and I'm sure you all would agree with me. I was about to hand the phone back to the masseuse when it pinged again, and this time it was text containing some sort of prenup document from her lawyer. Prenup. I don't recall signing a prenuptial agreement before we got married. I can't let her spring this up on me, so I decided to do the first thing that came to mind once I got back from this. My marriage was a mess ever since my wife and I exchanged vows on the makeshift altar in front of a rented pasture 5 years. Let me give you a little backstory on how we all ended up here. My name is Keyshawn, and I'm 30 years old. My wife's name is Alice, and she's 28 years old. We met at a friend's wedding party, and she had everything I liked in a lady. Long legs, killer hair, the whole razzle-dazzle. Sadly, she didn't have this great qualities in IQ, but I was intrigued at the moment about her. We got introduced by the couple who we were both distant friends of, and we hit off. Partly because of my curiosity and the fact that she ticked every box in what I wanted my woman to be made of physically. As we started hanging out, I had told her I didn't believe in love and romance and all those cliches. She seemed to agree with me too. Now that I think about it, she always seemed to agree to what I was saying all the time back then. I found out she attended Dartmouth College and was in her final year. At the time, I had already graduated and was working in a startup company in Seattle that paid well. The relationship began on a rocky start because I couldn't see her all the time. Well, rocky for her because she complained numerous times, but I didn't. I felt we had the same interests, so feelings weren't a factor where we were concerned. That wasn't a problem, as I pointed out. My wife and I saw each other when we saw each other, and a year later I proposed. No, I didn't have feelings for her when I proposed. It felt like a partnership, and of course she agreed. She didn't have feelings for me, I think, but we had mutual respect for each other. My friends all thought I was crazy for marrying a woman. I had no feeling for her, but my wife understood and agreed with me on every take. That's basically what every man would want. At the time, I didn't consider her capable of having an affair. To pull that off, you'd have to be smart, and my wife definitely wasn't up there with the word. I should have considered it, of course, that she'll be able to do something like that, but she hadn't seemed to be complaining throughout our 5 years of marriage. The sex was okay. She didn't want kids. I provided for her. I really couldn't see what else was wrong. I mean, she agreed with everything I said, so I thought she might have wanted it too. Could I have possibly been wrong? My friends had warned me earlier, as I had pointed out, but I hadn't given their warning much thought considering they were all love-whipped. Okay, I'll admit one of the reasons I had been pushed to get married was because they were all doing it, and I hated to be the one left out. Like everywhere I looked back then, one of my guys was getting hitched. I didn't want to be the one left because I had thought love was a fluke, so I got married to my wife. I thought long-term, of course, but long-term for me. My wife was pretty with a face that made a lot of women jealous for days, and I was pretty easy on the eyes too. I was content with that. She seemed to be content too. Heck, I still remember one particular party we attended as a couple in her university days. I was receiving the jealous stare from men, and all the women were giving my wife the death stare because they felt she had bagged a catch. I was the catch. We were a power couple, and she held her head a little higher as we mingled around her friends. She had laughed and clung to my arm all night while smirking and acting proud. That night we talked about our future, and she had once again agreed with everything I had laid out about what I wanted. That was the night we also agreed to get married, and I proposed to her. Although we didn't see each other every time while we were dating, I knew she was perfect for me, and we could make it work. Shortly after, we were wed in a not-so-fancy ceremony, and she didn't complain once. It was just a small gathering of my family and friends with hers. Well, it was mostly her friends. Her parents were terribly against our marriage. 1 year of wedding bliss, 2 years, 3 years, 4 and 5, not one single day of complaint. We made it work together. It seemed like we made it work together in my head, or maybe that was just my paranoia speaking. Lol, I've been paranoid for 5 years that I was doing right by my wife. What exactly would make a woman wake up 5 years later and start consulting her lawyer about prenups if she didn't seem content? What made a woman start laughing at around midnight to her anonymous lover right beside her husband on their matrimonial bed? What I didn't know, my fellow Redditors, was that she wasn't going to be content, and now she was digging up a prenup. A prenup? She wanted to rob me of half of my property with her lover and expect me not to retaliate. That wasn't going to happen on my watch. She must have thought I was easy to fool. Well, she had something coming for her. The first thing I did once we got back from our trip was to hire a private investigator. The PI came highly skilled and recommended by the site I had picked him from. I hoped he could get to the bottom of this. Why my wife wanted a prenup, and who this mystery lover was. His job was just to shadow my wife and dig into her life and find out what she was hiding. I couldn't just walk up to her lawyer and demand answers because that would result in betrayal of the client's confidentiality. Her lawyer might be in on the scam that was about to come into play here. I didn't tell any of our friends that I had hired a PI because someone could be in on it with her. And almost half of my friends thought our marriage was going well, just like I had thought. The irony. I handed the PI everything I knew on my wife, where she worked, her daily routine, her friends and family contact list. If I knew my wife at all, the information I had handed to him would be correct. Of course I had thought they would be correct. I had been married to the woman for 5 years. We had lived together. You guys won't believe the information my PI handed over to me 2 days after he started monitoring my wife. It turned out my wife wasn't really my wife. Yes, you read right, my marriage to my wife was null and void. My wife was already married. She was married. Can you believe that twisted piece of information? Yeah, I couldn't believe it either. I couldn't believe it at all. The woman I had said "I do" at the altar in front of my family and friends was married to another man. How, you may be asking? That was the question I had asked myself when the PI had broken the news to me. She was married when we were dating. She was already married in her 2nd year of college, and she had said "I do" to me knowing she already bore another man's name. Unbelievable. How had I never suspected a thing? My fellow Redditors, my wife was truly married. The PI had said there were no records of her ever getting a divorce, no records of a judge annulling her marriage even if it was a fake one. She had lived with me for 5 years. I began wondering about so many things all at once. No wonder she didn't protest getting married after a year of dating. Now that I think of it, she seemed eager to get married almost immediately, playing the demure girlfriend. No wonder her parents hadn't graced our wedding. They had been aware of the sham their daughter was pulling. And like a fool, I had married a scammer, all because I didn't want to be the one left out of all my friends. Lol, I had been a big-time fool, all right. A total idiot because I had just been outsmarted by my wife. Could I even call her that? It had all been a sham. If I had been told somewhere not too long ago that I'll be a victim of a sham, I would have laughed, knowing there was no possible way someone could outsmart me like that. I mean, this is the stuff I see in the movies and shake my head at what a slob the actors were that they had fallen prey to. But this is real life, folks, and I had fallen prey. I had married a married woman, lol. I didn't even know what to think except the fact that I was being played, either by my wife and her husband or my wife and her lover. That was probably who she had been texting all this while, right under my nose. And I had no clue. I hadn't even seen any signs. But they had been so clear to see. I lived with a woman I had no feelings for and knew next to nothing about. I had never seen her parents or siblings or any of her childhood friends even once. I hadn't even bumped into them perchance. My wife had been so perfectly mysterious and I had been so careless and self-centered that I didn't know I had been eating right into her hand. I kept the information to myself, waiting for the perfect time to strike her with it. Unknown to her that I had found out her huge secret, she still kept going on about her day like always. Acting strange, being less touchy-feely, constantly texting on the phone. However, I had caught up with her sham. All those things now had a reason. She wasn't truly married to me. The PI dropped information on her husband the next day, and all I could do was regret not hiring the guy sooner, maybe even before I had gotten married, to prevent myself from this embarrassment. This was a first-hand embarrassment that if any of my friends were to find out, I would become a laughingstock. I just posted this on here because I needed someone to vent to. Apparently, the guy my wife was married to was a low-bum financial analyst who had graduated from the same college as her. The two lovebirds had even attended the same high school and had gotten married when my wife was in second year. However, at the moment of the PI dropping that bomb, I still didn't know why and what this had to do with my wife wanting a prenup. I admit I knew the why and how, but what I was looking for was how she intended to use it against me. Before our marriage, we had never signed a prenuptial agreement, so I was wondering she was going to hold me to one. Fortunately for me, my marriage to my wife was a sham, so it wasn't going to hold to court. It was funny if she actually thought it would come to that I would allow her get away with tricking. So of course I planned out my revenge while waiting for my PI to get back to me. I got in contact with my lawyer and found out that my wife could get arrested for bigamy and face 5 years imprisonment or dole out $100,000. But I needed to make sure that there was no evidence of her ever being divorced or a judge signing their wedding annulment papers. I made sure of that with my PI when he got back to me on my wife's dealings with the prenup. My fellow Redditors, you wouldn't believe the information my PI came to me with this time. Apparently, my wife's lawyer was in on the scam with her. They had planned to lift my signature from one of my work documents and place on the prenup. Their plan was, while I was being busted up by the whole serving of divorce papers, that I wouldn't see it coming when they slammed the prenup in my face in court. Can you imagine that? They all thought I was eating out of my wife's hand, so the whole divorce thing will unsettle me and then they'll present the prenup in court. Did she really think I was that stupid? I mean, I was actually giving her credit for fooling me into marriage, but this was pure comedy. They had all planned this? A bunch of working brains had planned this. I was disappointed. Very much so. I had graduated top of my class in mathematics and statistical studies. My professors had termed me a genius. Ever since I had left high school, everything I had done was always based on facts and not feeling. In college, I was a well-oiled machine and a monster, according to the girls I had dated. You couldn't fool, as I could sniff out lies within a second. Most of the girlfriends I had in college couldn't keep up with me, and you could never say you had outsmarted me. There was an instance when my college girlfriend tried to gaslight me into believing I was the one cheating on her when she was the one being funny with my friends. I cleared her before she even realized what was going on in her life. I didn't like looking like a fool, and what my wife us just done was similar to making me look like one. Anyway, I told my PI to make sure there was no trace of my wife's divorce papers lying around and got to work with my lawyer. Before my wife was going to serve me divorce papers, I was going to surprise her first. So I sued her for bigamy, fraud, and infringement. At least she would be facing 7 years jail time with this or coming up with $500,000 bail. That would teach her not to mess with me. I decided I was going to break the news to her and call her out on her charade before she had the chance to think she had an upper advantage on me. No one does that. Not knowing her whereabouts, I asked the PI to find out where she was at the moment, and I got the information that my wife was last seen entering a hotel with her husband. They had been sneaking around under my nose. I stormed into the hotel and asked for her room number and began causing a havoc when they refused to release it due to clients' privacy. I threatened to write tons of bad reviews about the hotel and publish it on various high-grossing sites. The manager had to come down when the staff informed him of the commotion I was causing and took me to his office to talk. I explained my situation to him, and he took pity on me, which I hated, by the way. But it was a means to an end, so I shut up and let him lead me to the elevator. I followed his lead as he hands me the key card once we got to a hallway on the 3rd floor and informed me he had no in this. My fellow Redditors, I unlocked the door, and as you'd have guessed it, my wife was mid-coitus position with her husband. The shock on her face when she saw me was enough for all the stress I've been through ever since finding out that we weren't truly married. I smiled and threw the papers in her face that my lawyer had drafted up, including the divorce papers she so desperately wanted. I had decided that the best way to settle this was in court and I was going to make them pay. As I walked out, she was following at my back and hollering at me to stop. Well, that was her own business because it was more embarrassment on herself and person. There was a lot of people watching her as she ran after me as I exited the hotel lobby, her face still covered in shock and the hotel sheet wrapped around her chest. I got back home and sent a text to my friends arranging for a party to celebrate our anniversary with them. The plans of revenge I had for this woman was just getting started. The party kicked off and my wife was writhing her hands together in the corner while I mingled among my friends. Lowell, my smile was irreplaceable. I had told my PI to find the location of my wife's husband and had sent thugs to get him. They didn't know what was coming for them, and this was the best way to introduce my wife and her bigamy. And I'm sure you guys are thrilled at the course this was taking. As the party progressed, I got the call that the surprise of the party had arrived. I took my wife to center of our living room and tapped my champagne glass to get the attention of our guest. I gave a speech with a malicious grin on my face as my wife fidgeted by my side and broke the news to my friends. The loud gasps was what made me smile, and my thugs brought out the other man in my marriage. The irony of life was so funny as all eyes was on my wife and the man in my living room. I raised my glass and toasted to their success and started a round of applause to celebrate their marriage anniversary. The next day, my wife moved out without saying a word to me after I had planned to confront her. On that same day, I got a text to notify me of a meeting set between our two parties to sit and negotiate about the divorce. The meeting was already underway, and everything my private investigator had told me was in accordance to what my wife's lawyer had for me. They even still had the audacity to show me the prenup papers with my lifted signature on it. It was unbelievable that their sense was so scanty that they could serve me prenup papers when, first of all, our marriage was not legal. I was perplexed if people like my wife's lawyer was the set of people that presented cases to the court. The court of law couldn't be as stupid. Could it? Firstly, my marriage was illegal. Secondly, my wife lifted or could have even forged my signature. And I'm sure you all are dying to hear what I found hilarious in all this. The fact that they thought they could pull it through. My intelligence was deeply insulted. The meeting continued till late with us coming at a stalemate end, mostly because of me. I didn't plan on letting my wife get away with trying to dupe me. My lawyer fixed the court date 2 days after our meeting to try to come to an agreement. I rose as the court began its proceedings, not caring much for the court process, just what will be the end point. However, my fellow Redditors, my wife had a lot of surprises under her sleeve for this court process. She disproved the fact that she was married with an annulment certificate from 2 months after we started dating. My wife claimed that her first marriage was a scam, and since she hadn't consummated it, she thought it didn't stand ground, most especially after her divorce. Like I had mentioned somewhere in the beginning of my narration, my wife wasn't the smartest person on the block. Since when did non-consummation of a marriage mean the marriage didn't hold ground? She sounded like she was living in the 16th century. I mean, she was seriously embarrassing herself in front of people she didn't know, and the court. Well, that was nothing new for her. Moreover, they had consummated the marriage all right. That's what they had been doing when I had caught them that day. The court took the marriage annulment certificate from her to check its validity, and of course they found it non-existent. There was no record of her being divorced. Lowell, she then resorted to hysterics, claiming that she had watched her husband die, and so she didn't give much thought into questioning if the certificate was valid. This was also the reason she got married again. As you guessed it, her claim was disputed by my lawyer with a footage of her and her husband leaving a hotel together hand in hand. This time, her lawyer didn't waste a second before coming up with a counterclaim that she recently discovered he had survived whatever accident, and she was meeting up with him for the first time. The amount of lies that was thrown around by wife and her lawyer in argument to the charge of bigamy against her was a sight to behold. They had even produced records of her husband's accident and a document that had pronounced him dead. The document had come up as valid, and I was shocked that they had been able to pull a fake document. I was convinced it wasn't even the man's true death certificate and that they had managed to tweak it. I was so shocked at the turn the court was taken. I couldn't believe the court that validates all truth could believe a cheap lie like that. My hatred doubled for my wife then, that she had managed to outsmart the court of law and the people presiding over it. My hatred for my wife began, as you all already know, when she showed she could outsmart me by being married to another man already. I never knew I could hate someone as deep as how I hated her, and now this. It was like I didn't know the woman seated opposite me, like her true personality had shown up overnight, and I was in shock at the easy way she came up with the lies. It was ironic that she was literally the one telling her lawyer what to say before the judge. I kid you not. In fact, at that very moment, my anger and hatred tripled. I had being living with a stranger under the same roof for over 5 years and breathing in the same air. She had being holding the full capacity of her brain back from me, agreeing with me and putting up with me looking down on her so she and her husband could dupe me of my money. This whole thing was partly my fault. At least I admit that to myself, my fellow Redditors. I had seen the shallow side of my wife and thought that she would do for me. And the fact that I didn't want to be left behind amongst my friends, so I married the first person that ticked all my boxes and didn't do a proper getting to know her. The court had been adjourned a day later, and we reconvened back on that day for the second charge on my wife, fraud. She had claimed I signed the prenup papers, whereas I claimed she and her lawyer had arranged and lifted my signature from a work document. I leave many work documents at home, so lifting my signature wouldn't be too hard with the right skilled person. My lawyer presented the facts before the judge in turn, questioning my wife on how I had signed a prenup then, but now I couldn't remember it. Then the strings of lies began. She claimed I was drunk when I had signed them. Drunk? Me? Now I confirmed she didn't know me at all because there was no way under the clouds of the sky that I had signed some papers while I was under the influence of alcohol. I had never drank alcohol up to the point of getting tipsy or drunk from it ever since the accident that had almost taken my life. The accident had happened on the second week of my second semester in college. There had been a party being thrown by the senior colleagues who were to be graduating that semester, and I was done with all I had planned out on my list. So I talked myself into going to make friends or just have a good time. That was the first time of me ever attending a party. I got there and the party was already raving. At the door, I was handed a drink, and I don't the amount of alcohol that was put inside that cup, but from there I lost all control of my senses. I threw back more drinks than I could count, and from the party got really lit for me. Safe to say, I embarrassed myself in front of various people, most seniors especially. However, that's not what made me stop getting drugged. I was robbed and beaten senseless that night because I didn't have a sense of direction, and I bumped into a group of bad people. From that day, I promised myself I was never getting drunk again, so my wife's claim didn't hold. My lawyer disputed her claim that I was drunk when I signed the prenup with evidence of how the signature looked straight and not muddy, like how a drunk person would have signed it. That didn't deter my wife one bit, as she was overly eager of splitting my property along with this divorce. Property she hadn't worked for, mind you. Well, you could say she worked for it by putting up with me for 5 years to be able to achieve her goal. My disbelief, shock, anger, and hatred had mixed together at this point. This was premium stuff that only happens in the movies, and I lived it. Like I said, she really refused to give up, hence increasing what was supposed to be a small case. Redditors on this platform wouldn't guess the new case she presented to the court. Abuse. My wife accused me of emotionally and verbally abusing her. What evidence did she have, you may be wondering? She and her lawyer had tweaked a video of me shouting at one of my contractors on my estate and presented to the court as evidence of me abusing. At that point, it was obvious they were grasping for straws, and the judge had already concluded her judgment, but for the sake of laughs, needed to listen to them. It was hilarious, and I know you all would find it so. My lawyer quickly disproved the claim that showed it was my contractor I had raised my voice at on the phone. The court went on a break, and we reconvened back in an hour to hear what the judge had decided on our case. Revenge was really a dish served cold, because what my wife planned for me was handed back to her tenfold. She was found guilty of 2 charges, bigamy and fraud. The court set her bail at $200,000 with 3 weeks of community service. Her jail time was set to 5 years imprisonment if she couldn't meet bail, and I went home a happy man with my money, property, and peace of mind intact. 2 days later, my wife and her lawyer delivered the divorce paperwork to me, and I happily signed, knowing I had managed to escape a terrible scenario. There was no point in signing the divorce papers, but I wanted it to be on record that my wife and I had nothing else to do with each other, even if we weren't truly married in the first place. I wondered what would be going through her mind now that her plan had failed. There were still some questions I would have loved to ask her, but that hatred still burned strong in my heart, and I was just happy I never had to deal with her again. My fellow Redditors, I'm sure you all will be going home with a lesson or two from my experience. I really hoped you learned something from the terrible experience I had with the woman I had thought I had married. Try not to be like me that thought all these stuffs only happen in movies, and always keep an eye out on the people you call your closest. There are a lot of things to be wary about all the time. Stay alert, and until next time, my friends, thank you for reading my experience.